looks like I've got 35 minutes to talk about the principles of the therapeutic community. That's a tall order. Let's start with the word therapy. It comes from the ancient Greek, therapy. What's interesting is the early use of the word therapy in ancient Greece had effectively two meanings. One meaning was to prepare, generally to prepare for battle. And the other meaning was to heal, generally to heal after a battle. Do you see how that fits for the therapeutic community? So the impression you get from the early use is that we're talking here about effectively a squire to a knight. And the squire's job is to prepare the knight for the battle to come and to heal the knight from the battles he's been in before. This is precisely what the therapeutic community should be about. But there's an extra element in here that I think is really, really interesting. You've got the squire and the knight. Who's the boss? The knight. Who's the servant? The squire. So we are the servants to the people who come in. I'm going to kill somebody. Whose phone is that? We are the servants to the people who come to join our community. That makes the therapeutic community completely different from any other treatment intervention. Can you imagine your consultant psychiatrist saying, "I am your servant"? I don't think you can. You know that the old joke used to be, how do you tell the difference between your consultant psychiatrist and God? God doesn't think he's a doctor. Okay, so let's remember the difference between the therapeutic community and pretty much any other treatment intervention. I noted the question about 12-step and the mutual. I don't know whose question that was, and I will talk about that sometime in the next couple of days, because there are some very fundamental differences between the TC's understanding of addiction and the 12-step understanding of addiction, but also there's some fairly fundamental differences between the ways in which we think it's appropriate to address those issues. And I'll talk about that, but probably not just now. So, what we're going to be talking about in the next 2 days is the idea of the basic principles of the therapeutic community and how they can be applied with different populations and in different settings, although probably not very much on settings, because if you think about it, there's only really 2 settings. There's a TC within an institution, like a prison or a hospital, or there's a TC out with, sorry, I've just used a very Scots word, outside. We say out with in Scotland. Out with an institution. So there's only really 2 types of setting for the TC. So we won't be talking all that much about that, although there's some important distinctions between what you can do within an institution and what you can do outside an institution. And it's quite interesting that certainly in Europe our experience has been that therapeutic communities often started within an institution, particularly within psychiatric hospitals, and within the first 10 years moved outside the hospital campus. That's almost a kind of set tradition in European TCs. So let's talk about the principles and see if we can get you out for coffee in time. Very first principle. No, actually no, I know. I'm going to ask you what you think the basic principles are. What we're talking about here is, what are the core elements? If we think we can use the therapeutic community for all sorts of different populations, with all sorts of different types of problem, in all sorts of different settings, what are the core principles that we have to take with us for these new different populations? Anybody?
Group.
Sorry?
The group.
The group? Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely central. Very good. Yeah.
Bring it up in the group. Bring it up in the group.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking no violence, no drugs.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Safety.
Although if you were doing a therapeutic community for small children with learning difficulties, would that be?
The
Okay.
mutual help and mutual management.
Yeah. Community as method. Yes. Yeah.
Acceptance?
Sorry?
Acceptance.
Acceptance of the issues of the person.
Question?
Yeah.
Safety. Safety
Safety of.
of everything.
Of-
No drugs in the center. Safety for the people.
Cool. Yeah.
Progression through program.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Trust.
Trust between.
Everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Creating the right environment for
What would be the right environment?
where it's safe, where you feel secure, where you feel accepted, where it's a softer, more comfortable environment than what you're used to.
Yeah. Any other ideas?
All
Because I'm going to bore you with my ideas. Actually.
hierarchy.
Yeah.
That's one.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll get to that. Yeah. Was it?
No, I wanted to say hierarchy, but
Okay.
you said
Yeah.
it.
People help people.
People helping people. Yeah. Yeah.
Structure to everyday
Structure.
life
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
community.
Luna.
Using role models and the definition of what a role model is.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah.
Touching the whole person.
Yes. 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 Any other thoughts?
Self-help. Self-help.
Self-help. Yes.
Responsibility. Responsibility.
Personal responsibility or both?
Person and both. Yes.
Okay.
Hope.
You sit down. Right. Oh. Oh. Okay. Yes. Okay. There's some very good ideas there. I think that selecting the core principles of therapeutic community is a bit like selecting the top 10 and pop records. Probably everyone has their own personal favourites. I'm going to bore you with my personal favourites. What I want to say first, before I go there, and it echoes some of the remarks here, is that we really, really need to remember that the therapeutic community is a very complex intervention. It's not a simple intervention. It's not just one thing like I do CBT. It's a complex intervention. So there's a delicate balance between the elements that we provide that encourage change. Okay? And the first thing we need to remember about the therapeutic community is this. Therapeutic community is not about drugs, and it's not about alcohol, and it's not about addiction. It's not about any of those things. Therapeutic community is a school. where people learn to be positive, proactive, useful citizens in the wider community. As it happens, if you learn to do that and act it out, you probably don't use drugs anymore. But that's a side effect. Okay? So it's not about those things, it's about creating new citizens who are positive, who care about the community they're in, and care about the people in that community. And we try that out in a small community in order to prepare people for a wider community which is perhaps less supportive and less kind. So, my principles. The first one is the one that I alluded to, the whole question of balance. The therapeutic community is a very delicate balance between two core elements. The one element is, I just put, so stupid. I say one element and put up two fingers. The first element is the structure. A therapeutic community needs a structure. In most drug-free therapeutic communities in Europe and in America, that structure is hierarchical. It doesn't need to be, but that's generally the way it's organized. And it's useful in that way for a number of reasons, but it doesn't have to be. The point about the structure is where therapy happens. Not the group, the structure is where therapy happens. Floor work is where people meet challenges. I remember saying to someone a long time ago, if you need to understand the way in which structure works, remember this. If you get a chef through the door, the last place they're going is the kitchen department. Okay? Because you don't want people in the structure to feel comfortable, you want them to face challenges. Because the whole point of the structure is it creates feelings of challenge and frustration. And that is balanced with group work. Okay? Because within the group, those challenges and frustrations and the poor behavior that generates, that's where that behavior and those feelings of frustration are dealt with. Does that all make sense so far? This is, and this is, we have an expression in Scotland, you might not have it. I have a bee in my bonnet. Anybody? It means it's something that gets me quite irritated. That people forget the importance of floor work, of the structure. And one of the things that happens because of that is that people come into work in the therapeutic community. Quite often they're coming in from nursing or psychology or social work. Psychologists are the worst, obviously. And they have a particular interest in something. So they want to do relapse prevention. Okay? Oh, well, I'm going to work in this therapeutic community and I'm going to run a group every week on relapse prevention. Well, actually, we've got this fairly busy program. It's pretty full. Where are you going to put it? Well, I'm going to put it in between the morning meeting and the encounter group, because all people are doing then is just going around and cleaning up the house and cooking the dinner, and that's not terribly important. Yes, it is! It's really important. If you don't have structure, if you're not creating challenge for the individual, if people aren't getting frustrated, then I'm sorry, excuse my language, you've got fuck all in your group to resolve. The less time you have on the floor, the less material you have for your group. So don't fill it with all this nonsense. Now, I accept, sometimes you will have to. I've visited therapeutic communities in countries where the government says every treatment agency in the addiction field has to do groups on anger management. How ridiculous is that? The whole therapeutic community is an experiment in anger management. You don't need a class on it. That's nonsense. But you might be forced to do it. And, you know, we live in the real world. We have to do what if we want the money, we have to jump through the hoop. But the important thing I want to get to you is core principle of therapeutic community is balancing the structure with the group work. Okay? Everybody happy with that? That's my first. I think it's the most important element. And it doesn't have to be hierarchical. I'll just go back to that. You can create challenges and frustrations in, a single tier. The usefulness of the hierarchy is that it creates a way of rewarding better behavior, and it creates an easily identifiable system of role models so that you can set people targets. I've just entered the therapeutic community and I'm in the kitchen department and I want to be head of kitchen department, or I want to be head of gardening. Actually, I'd rather be head of gardening because I can get outside. Thank you very much. Which probably means that the community will decide that I don't go out into the garden. So that's toilet cleaning duties for me. I just said the community will decide. It's really, really important, and I'm going to come on to this in a minute about self-help. It's really important that the decisions about where people fit in the structure is a decision that's made by the community, for the community, not made by the staff. I'm going back to my original statement about masters and servants. We are not staff. We are members of the therapeutic community. I do regular lectures for residents in a therapeutic community in Scotland called Phoenix House, Glasgow. I know it's supposed to be called the Scottish Residential Service or something, but as far as I'm concerned, it's Phoenix House, Glasgow. Yeah. And one of the things I always say to the residents is, remember, there are no staff and no clients. What we have is TC members. And here's the great thing, everybody gets paid. There are some people within the community who get paid in money. And there are some people in the community who get paid in recovery capital. But everybody gets paid and everybody's a member. And that's one of the things that's very different about therapeutic community. It's one of the reasons why people coming from social work backgrounds or nursing backgrounds find it really quite difficult to adapt to a new situation where you're not the master doing therapy to the servant. You are part of the process for encouraging the community itself to do that work. Okay, so that's my first one, is the balance. My second one is this is a self-help process. And we say that, and I think sometimes we don't think carefully enough about the consequences of that statement. I am not going to say that therapeutic community residents are stupid, because they're not. We have a lot of research that would suggest that IQ within therapeutic community members is about equivalent to that of the general population. So there will be some people who are a bit thick, and there will be lots of people who are pretty clever. No different to the general population. Although you will find a very high level of dyslexia within drug treatment populations, but probably particularly within residential ones like therapeutic communities. Now that's not people being stupid, that's people having a different way of processing their instructions they receive, and things that people say to them and so on. Not about reading and writing, folks. Dyslexia is something much broader than that. In fact, amongst adult dyslexics, the most common symptom or sign is impetuosity. And that's about the way in which people hear commands and process them. And as one, we did a study on dyslexia almost 10 years ago. One resident said to me, there's only so many times you can ask, what did you say? And then you think, well, I'll just do that, because that's probably what it was. And generally isn't. So that's a much clearer sign of dyslexia than actual problems with reading and writing, because generally by the time dyslexics become adults and have a full-time, full-on career in drugs, they've worked out ways of disguising their difficulty with reading and writing, or they've worked out ways of dealing with reading and writing that work for them. Okay? I say this as a dyslexic. So, I'm not saying that your community members are thick or stupid, but if it's self-help, people need then to understand how the different elements work for them and for the community. Okay? That's one of the reasons why an essential element of the therapeutic community is the members themselves running seminars, because it's a school where people learn to live right. So we want residents in the community to stand up and talk about, this is why we have an encounter group, and this is why we run it like we run it, or this is why we do pull-ups like we do pull-ups. You know about three-part pull-ups? People know that? You don't do a pull-up. A pull-up is to tell someone that they're doing something wrong. Okay? You only do a pull-up if you can do the three-part pull-up. The first part says, James, it's not about you. I really like you. It's not about you. It's about your behavior. Second part is, this is what was wrong with your behavior. Third part is, this is what you could have done instead. And if you can't do the three parts, don't do the pull-up. Where did I get on to pull-ups? I'm on self-help. Right, okay. So the point about self-help is, although people in your community will be fairly intelligent, fairly clever, will begin to understand, if it's self-help, you need to keep it really, really simple. For me, the best therapeutic community only has these elements. Has a morning meeting, has an encounter group, has an evening meeting, and it has seminars. It doesn't have CBT, it doesn't have relapse prevention, it doesn't have anger management. All of that is within the therapeutic community. And here's the thing. Residents really, really like it when it's that simple, because they really understand exactly what that's to do. I was commissioned by Phoenix Futures in the UK about 10 years ago to write a manual. Actually, they tried to commission me to write a manual for their staff, and I said I wouldn't do it. I would only write a manual for their community members, and that as community members it would probably be okay for the staff to look at it. So I wrote a manual, and one of the things I did in order to write the manual was spend quite a lot of time in a number of therapeutic communities. And I can't tell you the number of times I came out of an orientation group and I said to residents, what was that group about? Oh, we don't know, it's just that's the Wednesday group. He said, yeah, but what was it for? Oh, I don't know. I said, but how does it differ from the encounter group? Well, it doesn't really. So what's it for? It's to fill up space. Don't be filling up space. You need a morning meeting, evening meeting, encounter group. That's it. Make sure that all your residents get a turn at doing seminars, plenty of seminars. But you don't need all the other stuff. Residents love it. They like it when it's really simple like that, because they can understand how they can use this simple intervention to change themselves and to help other people in their community to help themselves. My third core principle. So my first core principle was balance. I'm going to finish on time for tea or morning coffee or whatever they call it. First principle was balance. You need the balance between what I call floor work, but maybe you find it easier to think in terms of structure. You need the balance between floor work and group work. If you don't have that, you're not creating a therapeutic community. You need to be creating feelings of frustration, and also feelings of great happiness and joy, and the means to resolve those feelings and to share them with others. Second principle is this is self-help. So make it simple. People need to understand why it's working for them and how it works for them. And making it really, really complicated doesn't help that process. Make sure that the structure that you use allows your members to explore the purpose of the different elements of this complex intervention, so that they understand it and can talk to other people about it, i.e. to people in the community. My third important core element is sanctuary, and we're going to talk about this a lot in the next couple of days. You need that stuff. None of this stuff happens if people don't feel safe. Yeah? So, I'm sorry this is very lecture-like. I'd hoped to make this more interactive, but honestly, once I get started, people don't change unless they feel safe. Change is scary. You can only change somewhere where you feel protected and loved and cared for. Okay? We had a discussion a few weeks ago. The first therapeutic community I was involved in, there was 5 of us, and we used to bring people in. And in those days, the psychiatric hospitals and mainstream treatment didn't trust us. It's a house full of junkies. How is that going to work? So we used to bring people. We couldn't get people detoxed in hospital or anything like that. We used to bring people in, and they would detox cold turkey on a sofa in the foyer, and somebody would be responsible for that person who was withdrawing. So somebody would be responsible for cleaning up the vomit, bringing the water, making sure they had a bath. Someone was responsible for that individual. And what was interesting was that element is now lost. But that was interesting because 2 months later, when you get into a group and somebody's having a real go at you, it makes it different when that person is the same person who was cleaning up your vomit 2 months ago. So it's interesting. But how do we create a safe environment? Well, we have people coming from an environment that has been very unkind to them, that has not felt very safe for them. So we want to make them feel that this is something different. So we have a different language. We say every morning, "Good morning, family." I don't think that happens in most family households. Certainly doesn't happen in mine. We use different expressions. The language we use is slightly different from the wider community, purposefully so. It's so that people can feel that it's somewhere different to all the other places I've been to in my life. This is quite different. I once did a consultation for Coal Mine House in Ireland. There's no one here from Coal Mine, is there? And one of the things that a member of staff told me was, "Oh, we've got rid of some of the silly language." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well," I said, "Well, like what?" And he said, "Well, things like, 'Can I make you aware of?' or 'Good morning, family.'" And I said, "Well, why have you got rid of that?" And he said, "Well, nobody in the outside world talks that way." I said, "You're missing the point, buddy." That's precisely why we do it. We want to create a space that people can immediately see is different to the wider community. That's why we hug people. That doesn't happen all that much in the wider community. I mean, maybe in Greece it does a bit. I'm not sure. But I can remember seeing academics come to EFTC conferences being quite embarrassed, I think, by seeing all the other delegates hugging each other. And this is not an academic conference, which is a good thing. So, we use different kinds of language. We use ceremony. Somebody asked earlier, when do you know how to start a new TC? I'm assuming that's a question about size. How big can a TC be before it isn't a TC? My own view echoes those of the late Donald Ottenberg, who used to say, if you can't sit round a table and break bread together, you don't have a TC. And that would suggest, I don't know, about 35 people. So, but there are ways of dealing with that. So you might have more than one TC on the same campus, for instance. So, but we have ceremonies when we break bread together. We have a morning meeting that celebrates our ownership of the community. We have an evening meeting that is generally more business-like and is talking about what's going to happen tomorrow, but also is about, this is your community. You are the controller of this community. Rod and I talked earlier about Synanon, and it's well known, I think, that Synanon became something of a cult. How do you stop a healing community becoming a cult? You allow people to challenge the orthodoxy of that community. Where do people challenge the orthodoxy of that community? In a TC, they do it in the group. In a group, there are no role models, there are no staff, there are rules, obviously, but this is the opportunity to say, I don't like this, why are you doing that to me? And the community will tell you why we are doing it to you. The other thing that we do that is vitally important in terms of creating a feeling of ownership and safety is we create ceremonies. So we celebrate those who are graduating. The most important day in the calendar is when you take the whole community, somewhere, and however you define your graduation in most of the therapeutic communities I've been involved in, that's completing the residential program and probably a year outside the residential program before you graduate. This is so important, and there need to be symbols of that importance. Symbol. Graduation ring. Really, really important that we have that kind of ceremony, that kind of ritual, because it does two things. It creates a feeling of ownership. This is my community. I'm responsible for it. So if somebody tries to sneak drugs into my community, I'm going to do something about that, because that threatens us all. And it creates a feeling of safety, but a safety that we are all responsible for. I think it's time for your coffee. Thank you for your attention.